Hey everyone, welcome to the September 29th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski to take a look at some weekend racing at Santa Anita. They're kicking off their fall meet on Friday, Saturday the second day of that meet, and they're running a slew of graded stakes races. We've got three of them that are part of this, or I should say four of them actually, that are part of this late pick 5 sequence that we're going to discuss at Santa Anita on Saturday. One grade 1 event, that being the Awesome Again, the feature race at Santa Anita on Saturday, as well as three other grade 2s, the Santa Anita Sprint Championship, the Eddie D, as well as the City of Hope Mile, the latter two run on the turf. And Craig, interesting sequence at Santa Anita. One thing we should note at Santa Anita this weekend, we're not going to talk about it, but they are returning to the traditional pick 6 format, something that I know a lot of bettors have advocated for. So nice to see that. That kicks off the race just prior to this that we're not going to talk about, but we're going to discuss this 50-cent late pick 5 sequence that starts in race 6.
Yes, I mean, I'm not a big pick six player, but it is good to have the traditional pick six back. I think it's $1 bet this year, but it's a much better alternative than the jackpot and rainbows or whatever these different places call them. So it is a good horse player friendly move, I would say. And I'm happy to be back on the forecast. This is the first one I have done in a while. I think it's been a month. So really looking forward to dive into these. I mean, doing the pace cast, I enjoy that as well, but not quite as much as I do these forecasts where we get into handicapping the actual races.
Yeah, I was trying to think back to the last one of these that I did with you, Craig, and I know you joined me for a pace cast at some point during your time off, but it's been a little while since we've done much handicapping together, so I definitely look forward to having you back. And I think we're returning, the two of us, with a pretty interesting sequence here. I mean, the stakes races came up as fairly competitive affairs. There's a really difficult California-bred maiden race right in the middle of this sequence, is race 7, that I'm sure we'll have to spend some time on, but not an easy ticket to put together. I'm sure we'll talk about that when we get to the end of it. But, one thing that I do want to mention as we dive into the sequence, Craig, is that, times have really changed in racing, and this used to be a big Breeders' Cup preview weekend, and it just feels like a lot of the star horses are no longer competing in these races just 4 or 5 weeks out from the Breeders' Cup. And it's a double-edged sword, because a lot of times when you get those leaders of the division participating in these races, it just shrinks the field size and you get less competitive racing. But I think when you don't have these races serving as real strong Breeders' Cup preps, you get much more wide open fields. And frankly, a lot of these races are more fun to handicap than they might otherwise would be if we had that star power in there.
Yeah, I think we kind of hinted at that Tuesday that maybe some of these races would turn out better with all the, and I'm using air quotes, training up to, which that's a problem we'll talk about for a different day. One thing with racing is if horses aren't going to race, it's not going to be great for the sport. But it didn't really affect Saturday's card too much. I guess there's a few skipping the Awesome Again that maybe we would have liked to seen, but it looks like a pretty good betting race to me, as do all the stakes in here. You mentioned the maiden race in here. Not sure why the racing secretary didn't really do us any favors with that race in the sequence, particularly not being the first leg. But sometimes you just got to deal with these curveballs, and it's an interesting race in its own right. Just a very difficult one on top of the 4 stakes, which I don't think any of them are particularly easy either.
Let's kick off the handicapping, and we're going to begin things with race 6. It is the grade 2 Santa Anita Sprint Championship, this one going 6 furlongs on the main track. And this is one race, Craig, that feels like it could be a significant Breeders' Cup prep race, because the sprint division feels like it's in flux a little bit. I mean, we'll see who ends up running in the Breeders' Cup. I mean, there's talk about maybe Echo Zulu trying the males, and I know she's a horse that would attract a lot of support in a race like that, but the Breeders' Cup Sprint always feels like it's a fairly wide open race these days. So especially with the Breeders' Cup being held in California this year, this feels like a race that takes on a little more significance than it might otherwise. So just want to frame it up to talk about it through that lens as we begin handicapping this race. And it's an intriguing affair. I mean, I see that the horse that's pegged as the morning line favorite is the number 2 Dr. Shivel, and I guess he is a horse that you do have to formulate an opinion about, because he's been towards the top of this Southern California Sprint division for a couple of years now. He actually won won this race going all the way back to 2021. Hasn't raced that much since then, just considering that it's the 2 years since that race. I think he's only participated in 6 events. One of those was the 2021 Breeders' Cup Sprint, where he barely lost to Aloha West by a nose. But since then, his form has been a little bit up and down. There was a long layoff in there. And what do you make of his 3 starts this year, Craig? And do they give you confidence that he can get back to the winner's circle in a race like this?
I mean, his 3 starts this year have been pretty good. His Met Mile was at a distance that's probably a little longer for him, so that probably looks worse than it really was speed figure wise. At least on Timeform US, it wasn't far off of what he's been running in his sprint races. But you mentioned you couldn't remember the last time we did this. I believe it was Pacific Classic Day. And I had a similar thought in the Pacific Classic that I'm having here. And for me, it's really hard to get past the 3-year-olds. I just think these same old, older horses that we see in California, um, I just don't think they're that good. And the 3-year-olds have better speed figures coming in. And for me, they are the horses to beat no more so than Dr. Scheibel.
Yeah, I also was interested in taking a shot against Dr. Scheibel here. For me, the big problem with him is not so much the Met Mile, because that was always going to be a tough spot for him, second off a very long layoff with just one easy prep race under his belt. But I felt like he was supposed to win that Bing Crosby last time. I know he was a little wide, but that was a race that featured plenty of pace, and it was coming back to him at the end. He actually stuck his head in front about a 16th of a mile from the wire, and the Chosen Vron just came back on the inside of him, as did Anarchist. He even gave up second that day, and it just felt like a race that in the past the old Dr. Scheibel would have won that day. So I have some questions about him beating what I think is a tougher field than the one he faced at Del Mar last time, and I agree with you. The 3-year-olds are pretty interesting in this race, and we've got actually 3 of them from the Bob Baffert stable, and I guess you could make the argument based on speed figures they're a little tough to separate. Arabian Lion seems like the one that could really appreciate getting back to the 6 furlong distance. I was kind of viewing him as the most appealing of Baffert's trio, but how are you viewing this one, Craig?
I would say the same way. I think he's the most likely to win. This is an interesting race in Timeform US where we show the pace projector has 3 horses on the front end. We're predicting a fast pace, but really, I don't consider Dr. Scheibel to be a speed horse. It certainly wasn't in his last race. He's led a few times and won wire to wire, but those were in easier races with slower paces. And so I just don't see him vying for the lead, and that leaves horses Arabian Lion and Speedboat Beach, both trained by Bob Baffert. Hard to envision them going out and dueling with each other. So this is a case where I definitely do not agree with the pace projector. And I just think we're going to get a trip where Arabian Lion goes to the front. Speedboat Beach, he's a real wild card in here. If he shows up in form like we saw in his debut, his only race on dirt when he ran a huge speed figure, he could be dangerous, but it's just kind of that wild card for him. But that's how I see the pace playing out. And if Arabian Lion is alone on the front end, I just think he's going to be really difficult to beat. He's won wire to wire before even going 2 turns. I think the last race you can kind of put a line through that finish position. I mean, he ran a huge speed figure because he was pressing the insanely fast pace set by the ill-fated New York Thunder that day, who we'll never know what he was going to be, but he sure looked like a generational talent the way he was pulling away before he got injured. So I'm not holding that finish against him, and I'm with you. I think he is clearly the horse to beat.
Yeah, you make a really good point about the pace situation of this race, Craig, because as you go through this field, there just aren't too many confirmed frontrunners in here, and I get where that fast pace flag is coming from, but it doesn't feel like, aside from the Bob Baffert runners, that there are going to be too many that are really intent on getting to the front end. And when you've got 2 horses from the same stable as the likely speeds in here, it just feels like it's a situation that's going to favor that barn's runners. And I think you do want to note the rider change on Arabian Lion to Edwin Maldonado. And Craig, I don't know about you, but whenever I see a rider switch to Maldonado in California, it feels like that trainer, especially when Bob Baffert does it, is saying, I want this horse forward, because he's known as a speed rider, and especially with a runner like Arabian Lion, who's had success on the front end before, albeit primarily in longer races. But just given the way this shapes up from a pace standpoint, you've got to imagine he's going to get an aggressive ride. And if he makes the lead here, I've got to think he is going to be awfully tough to beat. What do you do with Speedboat Beach, Craig? Because he is kind of the wild card in this race, having run so fast in that one dirt sprint during the summer of his 2-year-old season. Kind of weird that they went to turf after that. I get why they did it, because they were pointing to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint. Obviously, there being no major dirt race sprinting for the 2-year-olds late in their season. So they tried the turf. He ran fine over it, but you've got to imagine he's a better dirt horse. It's just, where has he been for so long? He's been in training, stops and starts for a while, and now he's showing up in this tough spot. There's talent there, but he's a little tough to trust.
He is. I assume he's got a pretty big morning line at 12 to 1. I don't think he's going to get bet that heavily. So I have no problem using him as like a B or C type horse in a race I don't want to go very deep. He's going to get a good trip if he's in form, sitting off his stablemate most likely from that outside post. So it's not like he's going to be in traffic. So I don't want to totally dismiss him since he will be a price. If he was 3 to 1 on the morning line, I'd toss him immediately. But, maybe he shows up and that 120 he ran way back in September of a 2-year-old was just monstrous. And when you look through the chart, it's a speed figure that's held up pretty well. I mean, two of his stable mates were in behind him, and Hijaz and Fort Bragg, who's in this race. But of the Bob Bafferts, I actually prefer Fort Bragg more than I do Speedboat Beach. Not that that's a big surprise. He's lower on the morning line. But he's run some big races as well, and he's one that I think could sit a little bit more off the pace. He's shown some finish at longer distances in the past, and it's hard, you can't watch the replay because of what happened with New York Thunder last time out, but he had a pretty brutal trip if memory serves. It's a race I didn't even want to try to find just because of the way it ended, but I wish they had the at least until just before the injury occurs available, because if memory serves, I think Fort Bragg had some real trouble early on the turn. He was wide, so I'm kind of putting a line through that, and I don't want to totally dismiss him either. I prefer him to horses like Dr. Shivel and Spirit of McKenna, who's probably going to take some money as older horses.
No, believe me, it's a pet peeve of mine. I've mentioned it in the past. I mean, I wish Naira would do what the Stronach tracks do, where if there's an incident in a race, that they just edit out those 5 to 10 seconds of footage and show you the rest of the replay. It's a disservice to handicappers when you just withhold access to entire replays of a race when you're just basically trying to shield viewers from 5 to 10 seconds of footage. So I wish that we could get replays of at least the vast majority of these races, even where there are incidents. I completely agree with that, Greg. Though I had liked Fort Bragg a lot in that Jerkins, and I remember watching that race live, haven't seen it since then, but watching that race live, noting that he looked like a horse that really wasn't handling the track. He came off the bridle very early in that race and just seemed like one that never was comfortable, and Joel Rosario just kind of didn't seem to persevere with him late. So I guess you can give him that excuse. My problem with Fort Bragg, Craig, more so is the distance. I wonder if 6 furlongs is a little short for him. I mean, I know he's a horse that has run some big speed figures and shown speed in the past, but is he really comfortable coming from off the pace? It's not like he's ever shown that much willingness to pass horses, so I'm a little reticent to be too bullish on his chances going this distance, especially if this pace plays out in a way where they're not moving that quickly up front. He could be up against it a little bit. So I was a little less enthusiastic about him, and I sort of agree with you about Speedboat Beach. We'll see how much money he takes, but I think he could get bet down off that 12-1 morning line. So I was very much in the camp of Arabian Lion among the Baffert trio in this race. I'm going to throw out another horse that I think is intriguing in here, Craig. The number 5 Visitant is a horse that we primarily know as a synthetic specialist. He's won all 11 of his races. His victories have come over the synthetic surface, primarily at Turfway Park. But I think he's one that might have some versatility, because we did see him try the dirt going back to 2021 when he was running at a couple of races at Churchill Downs. Obviously, the Stephen Foster didn't work out for him. A mile and eighth is probably far for this horse, even on his best day or even on a synthetic surface. But he ran pretty well in that Ali Sheba 2021 behind Maxfield, who was one of the top older horses at the time. And 6 furlongs, we know that he handles distances this short. He's arguably more of a sprinter on the synthetic surfaces. I just think we saw his versatility last time in that Del Mar Mile when Peter Miller ran him on the turf. He was pretty game that day. That was a race that featured plenty of pace. He was battling back at the end as the race was falling apart. So I like that effort. So I think it validates that he's in good form since the trainer switched to Peter Miller. And I'm pretty intrigued by him getting into a dirt sprint.
Yeah, if I'm gonna use one older horse, it would be him. He's the one. He would definitely be a bit of a wild card. He has speed figures in the past, particularly that last one. Even though it was on turf, that was a pretty quick race with a lot of pace. He was right up on it. He has shown some durability in the past, even going all the way back to his 3-year-old, where he ran an okay race in the affirmed. So yeah, I have no problem with visiting. It just for me, it depends how deep you want to go in a race like this. But of the older, he would be the one I prefer because I just don't trust any of the others. I've seen enough of them over the years.
Yeah, and one more horse that I want to mention, because when I started handicapping this race, before I kind of appreciated how tough it had come up, I was expecting to like the number 9, Spirit of McKenna, because he is a horse that has had excuses at Del Mar recently. To back him, that Bing Crosby, he just got completely steadied and checked out of the race around the far turn. He just lost all chance that day. That's a race that you can basically draw a line through just when you watch the replay of that far turn run. And then last time, that was an extremely fast pace that completely incinerated. I mean, the runner-up Bye Bye Bobby, we'll talk about him in just a little bit when we get to the Awesome Again. I mean, he came from another county to get up for second in that race, and Spirit of McKenna was chasing the pace. It's just the problem with him, Craig, is where is his fast race? Because even if you go back to his prior starts at Santa Anita, they were good, they were wins, but they weren't the kinds of speed figures that stack up against horses like Arabian Lion and Dr. Shivel, or even Visitant at his best races. So I have trouble building a case for him as a win candidate, but if he drifts up off that 6-1 morning line, I just feel like he's a horse that hasn't had his best chances recently.
Yeah, as a speed figure guy, you made the case for me against him, and he's just never run a fast race. He's a horse that I kept trying to find races to beat him. He kept finding easy fields, but the Bing Crosby, I know he had a big excuse, but for me, that was the day, and it worked out. He had an excuse last time. I'm looking for the fast race that could keep up with the Baffert 3-year-olds if they all run the form, and I just don't see it, and I can't see all three of them not showing up in this spot.
Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence. The only non-stakes event in this pick 5, race 7, is a maiden special weight event going 6.5 furlongs, though not down the hill. This is on the flat 6.5 furlong course for the California bred 2-year-old fillies. And as you said towards the start, Greg, kind of sort of a mean race to put into the sequence by the racing office because number one, you don't get to see the board before you bet this pick 5 sequence. And number two, it's just a really tough race to get your head around. I mean, there's a lot of murky form, horses trying the surface for the first time, lightly raced runners that could improve. So it's a tough race to have a lot of confidence in. I think the inclination here is to do a little bit of spreading, but I mean, it's a large field, so you don't want to spread too much. And there are other races in the sequence where I'm sure you're going to want to use multiple horses. So you've got to narrow it down to some extent. I guess we'll start the conversation towards the outside. I believe the morning line favorite in this race is the number 11, Safa, and I get it. This horse ran a respectable speed figure last time, albeit on the dirt. Was a big price that day, but stayed on for second in what seemed like a solid California bred maiden race. And she just has turf pedigree. Not so much on the dam side, but Grazin is a good turf influence. We've seen him have a lot of success, especially in these California bred turf stake siring runners. And also, just looking up his stats in DRF Formulator, he's a 17% winning turf sprint sire. So that's good enough for me. I think this horse is a contender.
Yeah, I guess the big question with this horse would be the trainer. He's not a very high profile trainer. When I looked him up in Formulator, his stats are not good to say the least on with first time on the turf. He does have a decent ROI, I believe, if memory serves, but it was like one big winner and a whole bunch of losers. So at a short price from that outside post, which is no picnic going 6.5, it would obviously be a lot better down the hill. It's not a good post when you're 6.5 just on the regular flat course. So for me, I mean, yeah, I guess if this horse beats me, fine, but I'm going to be spreading in enough other races that she's just not for me in this spot.
I get it. I mean, watching her last race, to me, she's got a high striding turfy action. So I mean that gives me a little bit of confidence that she's going to handle this surface. I will note though she is a horse that seems to have trouble with her lead changes. So having already made 3 starts and still hanging on her left lead, that's a bit of a concern. So at a short price, if she is indeed a short price, I understand being a little skeptical of her, and she's definitely not a horse that I would want to lean on in this race. There are others that have some perhaps more convincing turf pedigree on the dam side that are trying this surface for the first time. Among those is the horse right to her inside, the number 10, Look at Her Glide, who is a bigger price. Didn't run nearly as fast from a speed figure standpoint, Craig, but this horse is out of a dam that was a 6-time turf winner, getting blinkers for a barn that we know can win these kinds of races.
Yeah, I prefer this one to the morning line favorite for the reason you said. For one, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to dirt speed figures when they change surface. And actually, I would prefer this where it's slower because that tells me the horse just didn't like the dirt and is, maybe more likely to prefer the turf. As you said, the trainer, he can win these races. He's won some at big prices. So yeah, I prefer the 10 to the 11, no doubt about it. A couple others I was interested in. The 2 horse Lady Lysome for Mike McCarthy. Ran in a race that came back pretty quick. He's a guy that does a little bit better second time out than first. And I thought this horse had a real trip and what was probably a prep. Should appreciate the extra distance. And the same for the 4 horse Asada Fries. Another one who ran on the dirt last time. Ran okay, but I actually liked her first race on the turf. It was also at 5 furlongs. Seemed to take a while to get going, but was really finishing off that race. And what was a slow race, no doubt, but it's just one that where I think this horse has some improvement. It's just a race with a lot of different directions you can go.
Yeah, I think something to note about the number 2, Lady Lithesome, as well as the number 7, Petite Filet, who comes down to the same race, is they were facing open company on debut. So that just feels like it was overall a tougher race than what some of these California bred runners that have been running against state breds are coming out of. So it feels like a drop in class for both of those horses. The number 2, Lady Lithesome, did finish a good 3 lengths behind Petite Filet, so that's why, obviously, the 7 gets a much faster speed figure, and I believe she's the fastest horse coming into this race. Going out for connections that don't have a lot of horses, the number 7, and a rider that doesn't get a ton of mounts on the Southern California circuit. But the horse ran okay with chasing outside on debut and feels like one that could potentially progress. But I do agree, if one of these 2 horses, the 2 or the 7, is going to take a big step forward second time out, I feel like it's more likely to be the number 2, Lady Lithesome. I wouldn't say that she had a ton of trouble first time out because, I mean, she just got mildly shuffled back in the first furlong. She broke okay and then just lost some position thereafter. I would say she was a little green through the stretch. She sort of ducked in a bit awkwardly and was finishing well, but was a big price that day. Michael McCarthy is a trainer that just generally does a little better second time out than he does with debut runners. She drew well, gets an upgrade to Umberto Rispoli. So, I mean, there's a lot to like about the number 2, and I think she's a major player in this race. The number 4, Asada Fries, the other horse that you mentioned, Craig. I don't know how strong that maiden race was that she was running in on the turf. I mean, she was sort of picking up pieces at the end. She does have more of a turf pedigree. She's a half to a 5-time turf winner, and Clubhouse Ride can be a versatile sire. So even though she ran a faster speed figure on the dirt last time, I don't mind her going back to the turf, but I do wonder if she'll get bet off that dirt speed figure, so maybe the value is not there. Some people might see the comment line with the number 5, Kits Katie. It says rough trip last time. If you're looking at the the daily racing form PPs, I think there is a little more substance when you're looking at the comment line, the expanded comment line at TimeformUS. I don't like when the short comment is just rough trip. I'd like to see a little more detail than that. And watching that race, she did have some minor trouble early. She got a little bit keen. Well, first of all, she was bumped at the start, and that was significant. But after that, she was just mildly keen, not seeming to settle that well, but saved a lot of ground, got a good trip along the inside, briefly lacked some room in mid-stretch, but then went back to the inside, and I was not sure that she actually had a ton of run, but she did finish up decently, one pace. Cutting back to the 6.5 furlongs We'll see if that suits her. The pedigree to me says maybe she wants to go a little bit longer like last time. So I feel like she could take money off that comment line last time, but she was not one that was really for me in this race.
No, I agree. She does not look like a sprinter to me at all. She doesn't have speed, and you definitely need some speed on these flat 6.5 races. They are turf sprints after all, and I agree with you. That trip seems a bit overrated to me. If there's one trip that gets overrated, one trouble trip, it's when horses are inside and stuck because, I mean, they are getting the advantage of saving all the ground on the turn. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but it just seems to me those things always get a little bit overblown.
And then one more horse that I think we should mention, Craig, is the number 9, Sassy Prancelot, who is a first-time starter in this race going out for Phil D'Amato, and you can dismiss Phil D'Amato on the turf in Southern California at your own risk. He's not generally thought of as a trainer that's particularly potent with first-time starters, but I will say I looked up his stats specifically in turf sprints with debut runners, and he's just 7 for 72, so that's just under a 10% win rate, but there is a $2.12 ROI for that stat. It's bolstered by a couple of big prices, including a horse that went off at over 30 to 1. I don't think this horse is going to be that big of a price, but she's by more of a turf sire and Sir Prancelot. Up the Dam was a stakes winner on the turf. She's a half to a turf winner, so there's enough evidence here to suggest this horse could be well meant in this spot, and the fact that she's got Juan Hernandez on board. I mean, I just think there are some signs pointing to the fact that this might not be one that you want to dismiss.
No, I agree. If you just go by the raw stats, I think it was 8% when I pulled it up with first timers on the turf. When sprints changes it a little bit, but he's had several that have run pretty good races that didn't quite win. So maybe he's a little bit better than the raw stats would indicate if you're only looking for win. And you know me, I've been talking about him for years. There's no way I would get knocked out of a pick five if he wins a turf race.
Yeah, and we'll see how things come together in the other races. I've kind of pegged 5 potential horses to use, and that's deeper than I would typically like to go in a race like this. For me, that would be the 2, 7, 9, 10, and 11. So we'll see if we can narrow that down when we do our ticket structure conversation at the end. But it's a difficult race to have a ton of confidence in when you're have so little form to go on, and you're surrounded by these other races that have a little bit more to sink your teeth into. Let's move on to race 8. It is the grade 1, awesome again, the feature race on this card. Mile and an eighth distance on the dirt for the older runners. And like you said, Craig, this is the one where it feels like the top players in this division are just not in action. It's an intriguing group of horses. Plenty of runners that are sort of trying to get back into better form. A few coming off less than stellar efforts. Some 3-year-olds that had achieved success earlier in the season that are trying to look to get back on track. So it's a tough race to have also a ton of confidence in because you've got those negative form lines coming into the race. And I will just say one of those horses is pegged as the morning line favorite, the number 2 Defunded. And he'd be a tough horse for me to take at any kind of short price, Craig. I wonder if he actually will be favored in this race because he's a little tough to support off those last couple of efforts.
Yeah, it does seem like he's headed in the wrong direction. I had a couple nice wins at Santa Anita this spring. Did not transfer to Del Mar. I guess somebody could make the argument that maybe he just didn't like the surface, but he's won at Del Mar in the past, so I don't buy that one at all. It just seems like he's trailing off a little bit, and it's not just that the competition got tougher. I mean, he lost to a few horses in this field, one of whom I wouldn't be surprised if goes off the favorite, and that's the 3 Slow Down Andy. A horse who's kind of been underrated for most of his career. He's won some very nice races. He's run some good races when he wasn't able to win, like the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile last year when he was beaten under 2 lengths for all the money. And his return in the Met Mile was maybe a bit ambitious, but he's run a couple good races since. And more interestingly, is the pace projector has him shown up on the front end all by himself in a race without a lot of speed. And I don't have a big argument with that. I guess maybe you could think Bob Baffert's National Treasure would go, the horse who led the Preakness wire to wire this year, but I'm just not so sure. That horse didn't seem all that eager to get to the front in the Travers. Didn't work out well, so maybe they'll try. But I just don't know if he's even that fast. And even if he is, it's not like Slow Down Andy is some confirmed front runner. So I think he's very dangerous in this spot.
Yeah, I agree. Slow Down Andy is the horse to beat in this race. I think he deserves to be favored. I echo everything you said about him. I think cutting back to a mile and an eighth is going to be to his benefit because he ran arguably a winning race last time in that Pacific Classic. He briefly stuck his head in front at the top of the stretch when he went up to challenge Arabian Night, but I think a mile and a quarter is just really pushing Slow Down Andy past the limits of his stamina. So I think getting back to 9 makes a lot of sense for this horse, and he's just super logical in this race. He typically shows up with competitive efforts, especially against fields like this. I think he's super dangerous. From the pace is something I think we should discuss a little further, Craig, because it is pretty murky. Slow Down Andy, he has wired a field on the turf before. On the dirt, he's not really known as a front-running type, though I think from this post, they're going to try to get some forward position with him. I know he's not shown among the leading group on the pace projector, but I wonder if Bob Baffert is going to have intentions to get defunded to the lead. Because, again, you've got this interesting rider switch to Edwin Maldonado, who has ridden this horse in the past, and when he rode this horse in the past, including to the Awesome Again victory in 2022, he sent this horse to the lead. Now, maybe defunded has just lost his speed recently, and I think that's got to be a major concern because he has been off the pace in 3 out of his last 4 starts, and I think a couple of those were not necessarily by design. He just lacked the speed to get forward. But he is a horse that has run some of his best races when they've been aggressive with him. So I've got to imagine that they're going to try to get him out to the front end, and we'll see if he's fast enough to do so. But Defunded feels like the kind of horse where you're going to know what sort of race he's going to run in the first furlong, because if he's too far back, it could be problematic for him, especially against a field of this quality. So just kind of wanted to note that with regard to the pace scenario. I mean, as far as the other Bob Baffert horse that you brought up, Craig, the 7 National Treasure, he's a confusing one for me because I thought they were going to go to the lead in the Travers last time, and for whatever reason, they rated this horse. I mean, maybe taking the blinkers off that day was an indication of that, and they just seem to have absolutely no intention to go to the lead that day, and it's a little strange that Bob Baffert even brought him over for the race if that was going to be the way they were going to ride him. It was just odd. Now they're putting the blinkers back on. It's the 6th blinker change of this horse's career. They just keep going on and off, and I don't really know what the rhyme or reason to that is. He did wear them when he won the Preakness, but even his Preakness victory doesn't necessarily make him a major player in this race, just given how weak that field came up and the fact that he had everything his own way. So I have trouble warming up to National Treasure here.
Yeah, I don't as well. And honestly, if defunded National Treasure were to go to the front, I actually don't think that hurts Slow Down Andy at all. I mean, if he goes to the front like the pace projector says, great. But like you noted, it's not like he's a horse who has a big history of going to the front and he runs just fine. He might actually prefer a target a little bit. And I like to cut back in distance. But I did want to talk about a couple others I prefer more. And I'll start with kind of a crazy one, and that's Stiletto Boy. I know a horse we've talked about many times on our various shows over the year. And after watching the Pacific Classic, I wondered if that was just it for him, if we'd maybe seen the last of Stiletto Boy. Um, the more I look at Stiletto Boy, the more I wonder if he's just a horse who does not like Del Mar at all. To me, it was kind of interesting. They got him right back on the work tab after that disastrous try. He's had a couple works leading up to this race. He's had his best successes here at Santa Anita. So I don't want to totally write him off as he's another horse who's likely to be up close to a tepid pace. Maybe not on the lead, but he wouldn't shock me if he went to the front either, if he is actually in form. And I never thought that I would like him at all watching that Pacific Classic, but the more I dug into his PPs, I'm a little more interested than I otherwise would have been.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Stiletto Boy is a horse that you want to give a long look to in this race, just because when you go through this field, I mean, you can have serious knocks against horses' form or their lack of speed and the trips they're going to get in this race. And if you're able to come up with some excuse for that Pacific Classic last time, Stiletto Boy just makes a ton of sense in this race off his prior form. He's got the tactical speed to get the right kind of trip, and he has been very competitive at this level against this type of competition for a long time, and he's generally been pretty consistent. He is a horse that you could maybe say likes Santa Anita better than he likes Del Mar, because he didn't even show up that well at Del Mar in a couple of spots last year. I mean, one of those was against Flightline, but I mean, he just was never in contention in that Pacific Classic in 2022. not nearly as poor as his effort last time. But I will say, and I was reading the articles about this race by our DRF colleagues, Brad Free and as well as Steve Anderson, and there was a quote from his trainer Ed Moser just saying that he hit the gate really hard at the start last time. It just seemed to throw him off, and he was discombobulated after that. And watching that replay again, there might be something to that. I mean, he really slammed into the gate when they were leaving, the starting blocks that day. So maybe that's the excuse. I guess it's a good sign that he's coming back in just 5 weeks since that, or 4 weeks since that last race. So I agree. I think Stiletto Boy's a major player in here, and even when he's in good form, he's not a horse that takes that much money typically. He's just always underrated. I like him in this race as well, Craig. There's another horse in here that I think we have to mention. That's the number 4, Skinner. He's another one of these 3-year-olds that's stepping up against older company. I think I've made my thoughts on him pretty clear. I'd love to see him going shorter eventually in a race that has more pace, because those shorter races, especially 1-turn miles or 7 furlong races, they have more pace, and I think he is more that kind of horse. 9 furlongs, I think, will be better for him than 1.25 miles, and I think we saw him flatten out last time after threatening to make a run in that Pacific Classic. But maybe he is a horse that's rounding into form. I mean, I get trying to make a case for him in this spot. I think there's a better case to be made for him here than there was in the Pacific Classic, but it's still maybe not the ideal situation for him.
Yeah, I wanted to make a case for him. He was the other horse I wanted to talk about, and the more I tried to build one, I just couldn't get there. I just haven't really liked his races since the Santa Anita Derby. He was pretty flat last time. He hasn't really been a factor in either of his 2 starts since, even though he finished second in that Los Al race. That was a small field. He never got close to Reincarnate. And Reincarnate's just, we saw him in the PA Derby. He's not all that good. He's not one of the top 3-year-olds. So I prefer the others, the older horses in here, Slow Down the Indy and Stiletto Boy. Not a big fan of the Bob Bafferts. I guess we should mention Senor Buscador, the horse that won the San Diego. It's not like he ran terrible in the Pacific Classic. I mean, he was just behind Slow Down the Indy in fourth, but it just seems like a horse who's probably going to pick up maybe a few pieces more than he would be considered a win contender.
And I will just say, it seems unlikely that he's going to run in this race. I was sort of amazed that I saw him entered here, because our colleague Steve Anderson had published an article on DRF just last week where Todd Fincher said that Senor Buscador was training up to the Breeders' Cup Classic and was not running in this race, and then here he is showing up in the entries. I think they're still leaning towards running Bye Bye Bobby instead, and Bye Bye Bobby is a horse that just doesn't possess much early speed going, well, this trip. I mean, he did wire a field against weaker 3-back, but just a horse that doesn't have the speed figure power to be competitive against the field like this. So, we'll see if he participates, but I agree with what you said. I mean, it just feels like a horse that could be up against it from a pace standpoint and got some better setups in prior starts. Let's move on to race 9. That is the Grade 2 Eddie D. This one is 6.5 furlongs, but it is the downhill course. So some specialists that have tried this trip in the past, I think we've got to give some credence to their form down the hill, and we'll talk about a few of those. But this is a pretty wide open race, Craig, and sort of along the same lines as the Awesome Again. A lot of horses that are trying to get back in form, or trying to come off layoffs and prove that they can still run as well as they had earlier in their careers, or maybe earlier in the season. Falling into that category are horses like the number 2 Bran and the number 6 Lane Way, who are listed as the 2 favorites on the line. And I think it probably is fair to say that both of those might have needed their starts in the green flash last time when they came off the layoff going the 5 furlongs at Del Mar. And I think the 6.5 down the hill has proven to suit both of them better than that shorter trip.
Yes, no doubt. I have the same thoughts. That looked like a pure prep race for both of those two, which is kind of interesting. In years past with the Santa Anita Breeders' Cup, they've always gone down the hill, but they're going 5 furlongs this year. But both of those two were coming off of layoffs of the red line variety in the TimeformUS PP. So it just seemed like they were more out to get back into running, get a little fitness going, and I think both of them are very dangerous here. This is an odd race for me in that it's an 11 horse field. You think it might be deep and contentious, but I actually just think there's a lot of filler in here. I don't see a lot of horses that I actually think are contenders, and I've actually narrowed it down to three, and two of them are the favorites that we've talked about.
Yeah, I've narrowed it down to four. I imagine we have some crossover there, Craig. I agree with you that Bran and Lane Way are major players in this race. Bran to me was the one that really looked like he was just getting a prep last time because he actually broke on top, and then Juan Hernandez showed no interest in getting this horse to display any speed. Just basically took him back to last, made a little bit of a late run. That just had all the hallmarks of a prep race. So I think we're going to see a better effort from him stretching out here. Lane Way is a horse that he's consistent. He loves to show up in these races and run well, especially down the hill. I don't think he's ever been, or he's been out of the exacta once in 8 starts, going the 6.5 furlong distance, or I should say at Santa Anita in general, and he likes the 6.5 furlong distance, finishing the exacta in all of his races, trying this trip. He's just one of these horses that, to me, tends to take a lot of money. He is a my racehorse runner. He's one that doesn't win enough to justify the reputation that he has, at least from my standpoint. So I kind of viewed Bran as being maybe a little more appealing than Lane Way, but they're both contenders in here. I was just interested in a couple of others. I imagine we're going to agree on, well, one of the two horses, Craig. I'll just go with the horse that I would make my top pick in this race, and that's the number 5 Noble Reflection. A horse that has a lot of early speed and is a little bit of an all or nothing type. He really does need to get that trip where he's controlling up front to be successful in a race like this. But just looking through this field, I think he can get it. There's not a ton of speed signed on in this race, at least not true front-running speed like he is, and you got to imagine the Connection's just going to be looking to establish on the lead. I love these elongated sprint distances for him. I think that as short as 5 furlongs can be a bit of a struggle for this horse because he's fast, but he's got that sustained fast speed. He's not one of those, push-button sprinters like we certainly see in these 5 furlong races often. I think he is more of a 6.5 type horse, and we've seen him run his best races going those distances. And, some might jump off him because of the last couple of races, but I thought he just had to go too fast, too back in a race that didn't really suit him. And then last time at Kentucky Downs, he turned his head at the start, got bumped hard coming out of the starting gate, basically lost all chance just a few steps away from the starting gate that day. So I can draw a line through that race easily, and he's got prior form that makes him awfully dangerous here.
He was a horse I gave a long look to, but I ultimately decided to go against. I know he's won down the hill before. It was in a cheaper race, in an allowance race. Sometimes in California, that doesn't make a big difference. There's often not a lot of disparity among the top allowance races and the stakes. I just kept coming back to I think it's going to be a very tough race to go wire to wire. If anybody can do it, it would be him, but I'm going in a slightly different direction with my top pick, and that will be the 7 horse I'm a Gambler. Um, he's a horse I think I actually liked the last time in the Del Mar Mile. Flattened out a little bit after taking the lead, sitting up close to a pretty quick pace, and he's just the kind of horse I've always liked when they cut back from longer distances to going down the hill. He had some success sprinting in Europe in the past, so it's not like he doesn't have any speed. And he's just a horse that fits the profile of the horse I like to a T. He has good speed figures. I should say fits the profile for going down the hill. So for me, I'm a Gambler wound up being the horse that I'm going to make my top pick.
Yeah, he's the other horse that I was interested in this race, and I was kind of torn between the two of them. This is one of the races I did a stakes preview for with Ashley Mayu this week, and I was kind of waffling on which one of these I was going to put on top, and I went with Noble Reflection, but I'd want to use both of them. I agree with what you said about I'm a Gambler. I thought he ran pretty well last time. That race sort of fell apart in the last furlong, and he got there and just couldn't really see it out. He was better going shorter in Europe, so I think turning back to 6.5 actually makes a lot of sense for him. He's been a little bit of a disappointment that he hasn't won any of these races, just considering the expectations they had for him when he initially came over. I believe that these connections purchased him at auction for $1 million, which I still think is a crazy price to pay for a gelding like this. But, eventually it could pan out because I think he's a horse that has shown talent here. They just have to find the right circumstance or situation for him, and maybe they have it on Saturday. We'll see how it works out for I'm a Gambler. Let's move on to the final race in this Pick 5 sequence, the last race of the day at Santa Anita on Saturday. Also on the turf course, this one going a mile. It's the Grade 2 City of Hope Mile. And, Craig, I spent a long time looking at this race, trying to make a case for different horses, and I feel like I've got some opinions against favorites earlier on. I just kept coming back to Hong Kong Harry in this race, and I don't like to default to short prices, but he just looks like he's a little like a cut above this field. And I know he's coming off a little bit of a layoff, but I actually thought he ran really well in his two starts earlier in the season, both in the Turf Classic at Churchill and then that Shoemaker Mile, where I didn't think he got the best trip that day, was maybe losing unnecessary ground at the top of the stretch and got going a little bit too late behind Exalted. But this did not come up the toughest field, and he just feels like a super logical horse in here.
It's logical. I have no problems with him. Of the D'Amato horses, he's one that I would use. I'm not really going to use Cathkin Peak, who I believe is a third choice on the morning line. Another Phil D'Amato horse who's not really in the same kind of form. But I don't want to just hand the race to him because I think there's a couple of other interesting horses in here. One of them is a 7-horse Twist, who I was actually a little disappointed to see the morning line on him, but I kind of get it. He's in good form. We've talked about him on the Pacecast before when he kind of had his breakout allowance win. I thought he ran a decent race in the Del Mar Mile with a little bit of trouble in there. Maybe not as dramatic as they make it sound. He did kind of flatten out when he was in position and moving like he was going to be a real factor at the end, but he kind of flattened out a little. But I just think with a better trip, he's a horse who could be dangerous and give Hong Kong Harry some fits. It's a race where I'm looking for horses who are improving and maybe moving up to get to where Hong Kong Harry already is. The other horse, and I guess the one I would probably make my top pick, is a horse just to Hong Kong Harry's outside, and that's Astronomer. I just like that he's just a 4-year-old. He's been pretty good on turf, winning 3 out of his last 4. The race off a long layoff, he set a fast pace and kind of collapsed. But I really liked how he rebounded last time. His speed figures are still a little bit light, but if there's any horse that's really going to jump up, I think he would be the one. And he's definitely going to offer some more value than the other two. So for me, I'll be spreading a little bit, but those are the 3 horses I'll be using.
Yeah, I'll just set some expectations for people with the odds. I'll put on my morning line maker hat for a second because I think the morning line in this race is off. Hong Kong Harry is not going to be 5-2. I mean, I think he's going to be closer to even money, Craig. I don't know how you feel about it, but he just is a horse that always takes money, and he's going to be a lot shorter. It's not going to be that closely grouped among the favorites, and I think that's going to inflate the prices on other horses, particularly, Twist could be around 3-1, 7-2, but Catholic Peak is not going to be 4-1. He's going to be a bigger price than that, and I think you're going to see prices inflate on other horses like War at Sea. I can't see how he's single digits in this race. So, I mean, you're going to see some changes from the morning line. So I like Hong Kong Harry, and I just want to state I have no illusions about how short he's going to be. He's going to get bet down off that 5-2. I just think he probably is somewhere close to 45-50% to win this race in my book. I just think he's better than these horses. So that's kind of how I'm leaning. I do think Twist is mildly interesting. He is a horse that had some trouble last time. I mean, that was a race where I think saving ground was really important in that Del Mar Mile. De Jour got a great trip and was a decisive winner, but Twist was trying to come around horses, was waiting at the top of the stretch, got checked as they were coming into the lane, and I don't know if he would have been challenging the winner that day, but I think he should have been clearly second. So I think Twist is interesting for that reason, but is he as good as Hong Kong Harry? I don't think he's proven that just yet, and I just trust the other one more. I'm not a big fan of Cathkin Peak. I haven't liked either of his last 2 races. I could go through some others in this field that are bigger prices. I mean, I guess Hit the Road is back races, but his recent form leaves something to be desired. On occasion, Flavius shows up, but he's another one that's tough to trust. Irideo is a horse that tends to outrun his odds, but I mean, he doesn't win that often, and he's drawn outside, and he's a horse that's gotten some very good trips recently, so he's a little tough for me. I do want to comment on the horse you brought up, Astronomer, Craig, because he does feel like one that could attract some support in this race just based on his perceived upside, and he is a horse that, based on the last speed figure, I guess he's not out of the question. I'll just say, watching that last race, I know on paper it looks like it was a fast pace, and you see those red color coded pace figures in TimeformUS. However, when you watch that race, the pace really held together. It's not like it fell apart. There were three horses that basically ran off on the lead. They were, 6 or 7 lengths of the rest for most of the race, and they finished first, second, and fourth, almost first, second, and third. The last one just got nosed out for third at the very end. So, I mean, it was not a race where the closer seemed to have any advantage. And the horse that did all that dirty work up front, Goliath, who was setting that pace, who Astronomer just barely ran down at the end, I mean, he's a decent optional claiming horse. I certainly wouldn't like him in this race. So I feel like Astronomer needs to prove it to me that that last race is really all it's cracked up to be, because his prior form, it's a little tough to make a case for him without that last race showing. So he wasn't really for me. And, as I kept going through it, Craig, I just kept coming back to Hong Kong Harry. And I know there are other races in the sequence that I have to spread in to cover my opinions. And my opinion here is Hong Kong Harry is just likely to win.
Yeah, and I can certainly see that. With Astronomer, the one thing I wanted to bring up, usually I dig through the charts and look to see how the horses have come back. Fourth place finisher did run huge next time out, winning by 5 lengths, but I don't want to lean on that too much because it was a race at Kentucky Downs, and you know my saying, what happens there stays there. So I have no idea if that applies to this race or not. So for me, it was just more he's a lightly raced younger horse who I think will get a good forward trip inside and be dangerous late. But I've got no problem with Hong Kong Harry. I agree with you. No way he's going to be 5-2. I mean, the only time he's always lower than that in California. He was even 7-2 in the Grade One Turf Classic at Churchill. So he's going to take more money than 5-2 for sure. But yeah, we do need to narrow these tickets down somewhere, and it's not a very easy sequence to do it.
Well, I think that brings us to our ticket recap, Craig, as we talk about how we might structure this, attacking this pick five sequence. And I usually make you go first. I'll go first this week, talk about how I might put this ticket together. In race 6, the Santa Anita Sprint Championship, I think we agree here quite a bit, Craig. The number 3, Arabian Lion, he would be the main horse for me. I just think among the 3-year-olds, he makes the most sense. So I think I'd lean towards making him the A, and then I would use Visitant as a B because I think he's an interesting price in here. And then beyond that, as backups, I could use horses like Dr. Scheibel, who I don't love in this race, but can obviously win. And, if I'm right about some other legs later on, he's a horse that I, could have some deep coverage to. I mean, on some smaller tickets. But I could also use horses like Fort Bragg, Speedboat Beach, and Spirit and McKenna, the latter of which is probably the best price of those. But it's a race where I want most of my play going through Arabian Lion and to a slightly lesser extent Visitant. In the 7th race, it's hard to narrow down. I mean, I'm leaning most towards the number 2, Lady Lithesome, the number 9, Sassy Prancelot, the 10, Look at Her Glide, and the 11, Safa, and maybe a backup with the 7, Petite Filet. That's sort of how I'm viewing it right now. I don't like to use 4 A horses in a race, but this just feels like one where I don't have a lot of confidence and I want to have some coverage. In the 8th race, the Awesome Again, I think that Stiletto Boy, although he's tough to trust, is going to be the right price in this race for me to lean on him a little bit. So my A's would be Slow Down Andy and Stiletto Boy, with the backup being defunded, because I do think there's a chance that with the right kind of ride, he might get back on track in here. And there's really nobody else that I want to use in this race, so I would just try to survive with those 2 and the 1 backup. And then in the Eddie D, I like those 4 horses, the 2, 5, 6, and 7, and the way that I would probably structure it is use Noble Reflection and I'm a Gambler as the A's, because I think they're going to offer better value than Bran and Lane Way, who would be my B horses in that race. And then closing it out, I'm going to lean quite a bit on Hong Kong Harry. I don't love doing that with a horse that's going to be a short price, but I think he's going to be the price that he deserves to be in here. So he's the A. I would use no B's and maybe a little bit of a C to twist. And I'll see how expensive the ticket is getting. I mean, if I had to make 3rd and 4th picks in a race like this, they would probably be Iriday or Hit the Road. But I mean, those are not horses that I want to have a lot of play going through in the sequence, especially given my opinion on Hong Kong Harry.
And for me, for the Santa Anita Sprint Championship, like you, I'm going to lean on Arabian Lion. I think he is much the horse to beat. As backups, I would use Fort Bragg and Maybe a little Speedboat Beach, but actually, I'm going to change that to Visitant. The more I think about it, I mean, unless Speedboat Beach is some crazy price, I just don't like the way that horse has been handled. I don't think he's going to be given his best chance to win, which would be going to the front. So Visitant would be more my backup in there. Uh, the Calbred Maiden Special Weight race, I think we're pretty similar in there. Lady Lysome would be my top pick. Some others I would use would be Asada Fries, the 9 horse Sassy Prance a lot, and also the 10 horse, who I think has some breeding that you also mentioned in there. In the Awesome again, I'm going to lean on a couple of the older horses, Stiletto Boy and Slow Down Andy. They would be my two A's in here. If I use a backup, it would be Skinner as opposed to your Defunded. So not hugely different in there, but a little bit. In the Eddie D, I'm a gambler would be my A. As backups, I would use the logical horses, and you talked me into Noble Reflection. I could see a case where he steals the race, so I don't want to leave him off my ticket. But so I would use Bran, Laneway, Noble Reflection as backups, but I'm a gambler would be the main horse. And then in the 10th race, the City of Hope, I'm going to lean a bit on Twist and Astronomer, but I'm not going to get beat if Hong Kong Henry turns out to win the race as well. So I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to structure that one yet. It would kind of depend how the other 4 legs line up, but those three will be the ones on my ticket.
Yeah, it's a sequence where I think you can narrow down the stakes a little bit. Having that Calbred maiden race in there does complicate things a little bit because it's a race where you want to have some coverage. But I think that we do have opinions in the stakes races, Craig. So I think it makes it a more playable sequence, especially when you're talking about a pick five with a 50-cent base. I think this is a ticket that I will likely play, and I think it'll be affordable enough. But just in a general sense, Craig, I'm looking forward to seeing how some of these races play out because even if they don't have the greatest implications towards the Breeders' Cup, they're competitive races, and I think there's a lot of sorting out that needs to be done in a lot of these stakes divisions out in California, with some of these horses not racing as frequently as they have in the past, and others coming back off layoffs. So I'll be interested to see how this racing goes, and also racing in New York that I'm sure we'll recap on the Pacecast next week, because there are a lot of horses getting in their final preparations for targets late in the season, including the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, we're going to see a lot of these horses in the Breeders' Cup. The same goes, there's some prep races at Churchill as well. I think they have 2 or 3 on Saturday. Not sure how much racing we're going to get at New York. As we record this, they've already canceled on Friday. Not sure what they're going to do with the stakes on Saturday, but I will definitely be playing this ticket at Santa Anita because, for one, I just don't think there's going to be a lot of other bettable action around the country, and I really do like this sequence.
Well, everybody, hopefully we give out some decent opinions for Santa Anita on Saturday. Thanks for tuning in to this TimeformUS Forecast. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on drf.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in, and Craig and I will be back early next week to recap the stakes action from this past weekend.